Hello, and welcome to the Energy Connect studio at ADIPEC 2023. I'm delighted to be joined by Carl Clayton, Partner and Associate Director of Boston Consulting Group. Carl, thank you so much for joining me.
Very welcome.
Now, CCUS, it's not a new technology, but it's got a bit of buzz about it now, and I think one of the things I keep on hearing, how can you scale it up?
No, you're right. Many of the chemicals that are used within the process were first patented in the 1930s. So it's been around a long time. I would say, each step of the value chain has been proven at scale. But typically, I think what we're seeing globally across markets is there needs to be a level of incentive applied in order for the technology to really scale. Yeah. But I think the interest in scaling the technology is definitely at an unprecedented level compared to, the last few years, last decades, for example.
And how important within that is sort of, policy or government incentives to sort of encourage industry to take up CCUS?
I mean, look at Norway. There are 2 operational CCS plants in Norway. Both were deployed by the National Oil Company because there was a carbon tax applied to their methane emissions. So it was more cost effective to do CCS than it was to pay the carbon tax. So, that was 20 years ago for one of those assets. So as you can see, you need that drive, you need that push. I think the utopia of having a global carbon price that makes it more affordable to decarbonize than to not is where we'd like to see things. But we see probably regional disparity in terms of the level of movement, but also the level of the support that's required. The European regulatory environment is very different to the North American regulatory environment, and then you come here to the region and it's different again. So I think there's lots of precedent, there's lots of known ways of doing things, and I think it's going to be, in the next few years, we will start finding the right niches for the right location.
Yes, and I mean, that was one of the questions about, which regional markets are sort of moving forward with CCUS development, and, North America, especially with, the IRA bill that came in, and, Oxy have definitely jumped and pushing ahead with DAC, and they made an announcement with ADNOC here at ADIPEC about that as well.
They did. The Inflation Reduction Act is, we often use the carrot or the stick terms for CCS policies, and applying $85 a ton for CCS or $180 per ton for DAC, it closes the gap or it creates a commercial business case in some scenarios. When you have a high concentration CO2 stream, gas processing, ethylene oxide, some of these things, we're working with clients in North America now on live projects that will go forward because they have that incentive, they have the regulatory regime in place, and they're able to progress. If you consider the sort of the counter to that and the European context, we have a much more stringent regulatory environment that's been put in place, blending regulated models for the infrastructure with contracts for difference for the capture assets, which means it's a slower route to deployment because there's much more government oversight. But I think there are a lot of lessons to learn for regions like here and for Southeast Asia and some of the other big CCS-related sectors and industries and nations that they will be able to kind of observe, take note, and develop things out on their own. And at the end of the day, I mean, mentioning those developing regions, I mean, here in the Middle East, CCS is going forward. You've just called out this week's ADNOC and Oxy. ADNOC also announced they'd selected Petrofac to be the EPC on their second CCS facility here. Alongside, there's already a blue ammonia plant as well. I mean, there's a CCS operation facility in Qatar. You have Aramco developing the Jubail CCS hub. So these projects are advancing and these projects are developing, and it's really exciting to see.
Just say we're at ADIPEC, and the theme is decarbonisation, or decarbonise faster and together.
Yeah.
And that sort of sums up, I think, what you're sort of saying there. The region here is starting to implement and move ahead with these projects, but also doing it in collaboration, which is going to be key going forward.
Yeah, it really is. And I think there's 2 ways that you can look at the collaboration. You need a public-private collaboration, as we were just talking there about policy, regulation, the right level of incentives or drive to do the projects. But we also need to see private sector collaboration as well. One of the big trends in CCS is the development of CCS hubs, which is basically a clustered development of emitters developed around a shared infrastructure, which basically reduces costs, shares risk, and is a really prominent way that we're seeing CCS develop globally.
I think that probably is in Canada. Alberta was looking at hubs, wasn't it, Manchester?
Yep, yeah, there are. That's correct. Yep, everywhere. We have the UK ran like a hub sequencing process where they actually asked for the consortiums to apply into the government process for selecting, what they would defer as a track one. Organizations that we're involved in North America, US and Canada, they're really starting to focus on, if I do a project here, who else can I bring in? And again, that's being driven by the fact that they have the regulation and the precedent set to be able to, encourage consumers and customers to use the infrastructure.
Great, Carl. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming down and talking all about CCUS and the trends. And so, watch this space, I think.
Yeah, let's see what progress we've made by ADIPEC 2024.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. And I look forward to bringing more studio interviews from the show floor in the coming days.